some cases, but we need to look at the industrial organization of bureaucracy. And what does bureaucracy involve? Well, in theory, all the different US government agencies and bureaus should be working together. They should be coordinating. They should say, look, we all want to bring freedom and liberty and democracy and free markets to Iraq, the Middle East, whatever. Right? But how do bureaucracies really act? Well, bureaucracies are nonprofit by definition. There's nothing inherently bad about that. This is the characteristic of bureaucracy. But it's something we have to think about because the fact that they're nonprofit creates certain incentives and constraints. Where do bureaucracies get their money from? Well, it's not from profit. It's not from consumers. Right? It's not like Verizon where you and I turn over our money for our cell phone service every month. No, they get their money from government actors. Right? The government determines its budget. There's a process they go through for allocating it to different bureaus. So how do they really get their budget? They become very good friends with those people that control the budget. On top of it, what else do? They exhaust their budgets. They have an incentive to exhaust their budgets. Now, if you ran a business and you said at the end of the year, oh man, I have $20,000 in the bank. This is great. It's my money. Right? You wouldn't say, man, I better spend down that $20,000 by the end of the year. Because if I don't, I'm going to be in trouble. You'd say, no, I want to save it. That's money. That's profit to me. Well, what do government bureaus do? They say, I have $20,000 left. Send out an email. Please let me know if you need a new desk chair. Right? And by the way, this isn't just in reconstruction. I see this all the time. I'm at West Virginia University. It's a massive bureaucracy. Last year, at the end of the year, we get an email from our chairperson. All right? The email was telling us that we were all getting new clocks in our office. All right? Now I said, look, my clock's working fine. I didn't buy it yesterday. It was there when I got there, but it's never told me the wrong time. Why were they doing that? Because they wanted to spend their budget. They wanted to buy random stuff that we didn't need. Why? Well, what happens if you don't spend down your budget? Your budget gets cut next year. They say, look, you were able to accomplish X using less money, so we're going to even give you less next year. In order to avoid getting your budget cut, you exhaust it, even if it's wasteful. So it's precisely the opposite of how markets operate, where there is a strong incentive to encourage savings. So that's the budget exhaustion. So you have all these agencies competing with each other. They all want a piece of that budget, even though they're supposed to be united in a common goal. Now if you go back and put aside whether you like George Bush or not, it's irrelevant. But if you go back and read those newspaper clippings about the State Department fighting with the Pentagon, what are they really fighting about? Competition over scarce resources, including power over who determined policy in Iraq and Afghanistan. That's what they were fighting over. I want the power. Why? More money, more subordinates. That's how success is measured in bureaucracies. Reverse feedback mechanisms. Ludwig von Mises has a book called Bureaucracy. What is he talking about in that book? Well, he's talking about the fact that precisely because bureaus are nonprofits, they are not subject to profit and loss accounting, which means they are unable to engage in rational economic calculation. They don't know how to allocate resources to solve the core economic problem. So how do they allocate resources? Well, here's another rule of thumb. In addition to always seeing coordination and better planning, bureaus have the most colorful reports that you'll ever see. They're very glossy and shiny. You can call them and get copies sent to you. On top of that, they measure very basic outputs that are easily observable. Things like number of schools built, number of hospitals built, number of roads built. We're back to the roads again. Why do they like these things? Because they can just quickly dump resources in them and get outputs, right? Now here's the thing. How many of you would think that a school is good if there's people shooting around it, right? So in other words, no one can use it. Or there's not well-trained teachers. Or how many of you would say, look at this beautiful hospital, isn't that great we built that? And I said, but no one's in there because you don't have any trained staff that is capable of utilizing it in a way which makes citizens better off. You'd say, yeah, that's ridiculous. Why did we waste millions of dollars building a hospital? And I'd say, well, you say that can't be true. And I said, yeah, actually that's what happened in Iraq and Afghanistan, right? We spent lots of money building buildings that no one can use. Go back to that New York Times article I put up at the beginning. We sent all those tractors over there. They were beautiful tractors, I'm sure, probably state-of-the-art. Somehow they were sitting there rusting. Now, we could say, well, Afghanis, they don't know any better, right? They're just not smart enough. Right? I'd say, no, I don't believe that because I'm an economist and I realize people respond to incentives. Right? Everyone responds to incentives. There must be something else going on. So you have perverse feedback mechanisms. And what happens is you get these they're very obviously that they're not, it's very obvious that they're not good measures, but we still see them doing it repeatedly. And finally, you get inefficient information flows. Gordon Tullock has a book called The Politics of Bureaucracy. All right? And basically, while Mises focused on profit and loss, economic calculation, Tullock was focused on the flow of information within the firm. In this case, within the bureaucracy, right? Government bureaucracies. So there's two types or distinction between knowledge and information, right? Knowledge is context specific, what Hayek called knowledge of time and place. If you're confused by this, think about riding a bike. If I said to you, please write down a list of 5 instructions so I can follow them and ride a bike, right? Like I could put this together if I came with instructions, like flip it over, screw here, I could follow it. We could all follow it and put it together. If I said, please write a list of 10 instructions to ride a bike, you wouldn't be able to do it. You'd say, well, you kind of get on it and balance it, and then you apply it to something like you just know it when it happens. You know that feeling. That's local knowledge. Information is book knowledge. That's the putting together thing, right? We can all know it. You can go get a book off the library shelf. So Mises' point in bureaucracy is you don't have this knowledge of time and place, this local knowledge, any way to utilize it because of the absence of profit and loss. Tullock's is that there's massive inefficiencies within bureaucracies with the flow of communication up and down the chain. Again, if you just read about what happened in Iraq, there was such a lack of communication, right, between the different agencies. In many cases, they had the information that was relevant. It just never got to the right people. Now, notice the response oftentimes, and you saw this with FEMA. What did they do with FEMA, right? Well, originally it was independent, and then they put it under the Department of Homeland Security. Why did they do that? Well, they said, well, it's going to be better oversight, better flow of information. But economics would predict exactly the opposite, because now you've made the information chain even longer between the top and the bottom, right? Exactly this. So there's all this talk about creating these. Now actually, Bush created an Office of Stabilization, Reconstruction, and Coordination that's supposed to oversee reconstruction efforts. But they're talking about expanding it, right? And well, we should say, wait, if we do this, we're going to have these massive information problems. Right? There's going to be these big problems of communication between people within the Bureau. So we better think about this before we do it. So the industrial organization of bureaucracy would predict exactly what we've seen in Iraq and Afghanistan. You get what? Massive waste, lack of allocating resources in a way that actually generates things that people value, because there's no profit and loss to signal that, and poor communication. Here's an example. Community stabilization, a beautiful sounding program. Who doesn't want to stabilize the community, right? We all want to stabilize the community. Let's invest $644 million in it. And here's the idea. On paper, it sounds brilliant. There's people in Iraq who are fighting against the United States, insurgents. One of the reasons, or the claim was at least, that they didn't have jobs. If you don't have jobs, then the opportunity cost of engaging in combat is supposedly lower. Okay, we can debate whether that's true or not empirically, whether it's an issue of employment. But let's just go with the reasoning. And they say, look, let's basically have a stimulus package for Iraq. Let's create jobs. We'll literally pay people to do stuff, right? And then they won't want to fight, because who wants to blow stuff up if they're building a road? You wouldn't want to blow it up. You just worked all day on it, and you got paid. So you can come back tomorrow and get paid more to build something else. Sounds good. Well, it's not so good. Seems like, by the way, this should be something we could pull off, building roads, right? We're not trying to even design a constitution here. We're trying to build infrastructure, all right? What happens? Well, the USAID is United States Agency for International Development, by the way. That's basically the government bureau that sees, or agency that oversees much of our development efforts abroad. The Administration of Foreign Aid. They're involved in Haiti right now, carrying out the reconstruction plans, and they're a major player in Iraq as well. Well, here's what they found, and this goes back to that culture of corruption. People started signing up fake people to basically who were receiving paychecks from the American taxpayer through USAID, who didn't exist, and they weren't doing any work. On top of that, they found out that insurgents were, so people shooting at US troops were filling out these forms and getting paychecks through this program. In other words, and this is not an exaggeration, we were funding the people that were shooting at us. We were paying insurgents. All right? So what happens? Well, most of us would say something major is going wrong here. We should take a deeper look at this. And they go, look, close down the program, but we're not getting rid of it. Nope, better coordination. If we only